Hi, I'm Beth from Nana's Quilt Cottage, and today I'm going to show you how to do a bias binding on my cute little project here. It comes out of the Quilts and More Winter 2022 edition, and this cute little project is called Cup of Cheer. Okay, so we're going to start. I have my little oval here, and it's pretty small, and it has lots of round edges, so that's why we want to go with the bias binding. So I'm going to go ahead and start by showing you how to cut the bias binding, and we're going to start by taking our fabric, and when we fold it, it's going to end up with the wrong side up, and that's not going to matter. If it makes you happy, flip it over so the pretty side is up. And so what I have done is I have folded my corner to the edge, and then my ruler won't fit over this entire edge. So what I'm going to do is just fold it up again so we have a shorter edge to work with. And I'm going to try and get it as close as I can, but I'm also willing to take a little bit more of a nip out of it so that I can make sure I get both edges. So I have my ruler set up on that edge, and I have my rotary cutter. And sometimes it doesn't go all the way through all 4 layers, so I'm just going to go again. That one spot just doesn't want to cut. There we go, get that out of the way. Okay, and now I'm going to flip this over so that because I'm right-handed, I need that on the right side. And then on this little project, because it's so small, we went with a 2 1/4 inch binding rather than the 2 1/2. You have lots of options on a project this size. You could sew it from the front to the back, and then you could hand stitch it, or you could sew it front to back and machine stitch it as you stitch in the ditch from the front side, or you could do the traditional where you stitch it on the back and then fold it over to the front and then top stitch on that little edge close to the edge of your binding. So do whatever works best for you, whatever you're comfortable with. For us, what we're going to do is we're going to sew it from the back to the front using the 2 1/4. So I actually already have mine cut out, so I'm just going to show you right here. This is all we would do, is we would cut at 2 1/4. And I end up with a nice long strip. Actually, I end up with 2. So here's one long piece, and then another piece. And then as you work down into this, it's going to progressively get smaller and smaller. And so the next piece would just go 2 1/4 if you're cutting it 2 1/4, or 2 1/2, whichever makes you happy. And then you just keep cutting as much as you want. And then we're going to join the pieces. So you can see my stripes. We love stripes here at Nana's. So when I lay this out, I could do the traditional way of like this, draw my diagonal and sew it, but I would waste a good bit of fabric. So what I'm going to do is go with this slightly easier method because it requires far less pins. And so what I'm doing is I'm laying them out so that the direction of the stripe is going in the same direction, and then I'm going to put them on top of each other so that I have equal amounts hanging off the edge. And then I'm just going to take 2 pins here, and I'm just going to pin it, and then I'm going to sew across. Now the important thing is, if you can see it here, there's this little vortex right here. It creates a V. If I start my stitch right here and I go all the way down and I end in the same place down here, then I end up with the perfect overhang, and it ends up coming out nice and straight when it's straightened out. The best way I found to do that was to actually put this under my foot on my machine so that the edge of the foot is right along the raw edge of the fabric, and I moved my needle until I had it right in this one little spot, and then I stitched and it worked perfectly. So for this project, I actually have one already made that's already put together. You can see my little join right here. I have ironed it with the seam open so that it just reduces the bulk a little bit, and I have folded it over, and I have ironed the edges so that they are nice and as correct as they can be. Not correct, that's not the right word, as matched up as they can be. And so for this little project, what I wanted to do was start with the my seam, which actually turned out really, really good because these little stripes, it's right here, and it looks like it's just all works together, flows very well. So I put my join back here on this edge, and then I just kind of worked it around until I got to the front. And you can see once we come out of the corners on both of these right here, there's not a lot of opening. So I only want to go just around the corner and then leave as much as I can for that straight edge so that I can get that join in there. So I'm just going to put a pin right here, or a clip. The clip works really well, so we'll go with the clip. And then I'm just going to stitch all the way around. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam. And then as I sew, I'm going to try and match this edge of the binding up with the raw edge of the project. And it's super important to not stretch this. Bias binding has a little bit more of a stretch than your normal width of fabric binding, but it's not hard at all to work with. At first I was a little nervous, but it ended up much easier than I expected. So it's just important to make sure you don't stretch. So here at Nana's, we love stripes, and anytime we can get them to come on the bolt with a stripe going the correct direction, we love that too. So I'm going to measure, I'm using a 1 1/4 by 12 inch ruler, and I'm just going to make sure I have a pretty basic machine, so I'm going to make sure that my needle is set for 1/4 inch. And if you have a digital machine, you probably have an indicator of some sort to show you that. Because there's going to be a bit of tugging on the binding once I get to joining it, I'm going to back tack just a couple stitches, just like 2 stitches, just to give it a little bit more strength. And I'm just matching up those edges. And sometimes on the corner, depending on how tight it is, I might only be working 1 inch at a time, and then I'm going to stop with my needle down, and then I'm going to go about another inch. Wearing one of those quilting gloves would also be handy to just give you a little bit more traction. So Nikki does a lot of videos on Facebook, and they're lots of fun. She's a great teacher, so we always recommend going and checking out her videos. And then we love to do classes here at Nana's, so check us out on our website, which is just nanasquiltcottage.com. And when you scroll down to classes, every day that has a dot has a class, and then if you scroll over the square, it will also show you the project. It'll pop up with a little picture. So in this case, my edge is starting to move away just a hair more than I want to, so I'm going to stop with my needle down and just kind of scooch it over a hair and then get it back in place. And I'm just going to go right past this little corner and then stop, and I'm just going to back tack 2 stitches just to give it a little strength. And I have lost my scissors. Thank you. You can see on this, I ended up with pretty large tails, and I would be happy with that. I'm not sure the boss would be as happy, but I like it because it gives me lots to work with. It would also require that it would take a little bit more fabric. You wouldn't be able to go with a bare minimum and make it work. But I thought it was more important to have my original seam back here on the back rather than ending up with one on the side and another one on the bottom. Okay, so you can see I have a pretty small amount here. I'm going to turn this so it faces me. And I am going to be working with the left side, and I'm going to cut it a little bit long so that I can work with it. And actually, I'm going to try folding this upwards and see how much I kind of need. I'm kind of pre-fitted. So our whole goal here is to end up with a 45 on the edge and then a 90 here on this strip. And I need it so that it fits nicely in the middle here. So what I'm going to do is I've kind of fitted this, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it back over here, which is probably an inch longer. And if we need to, we'll trim it some more. Okay, so that's a little bit long. So we're going to shorten this up just a little bit. And I want this to go the full length here so that I don't end up with any raw edges showing. So let me see if I can get my fingers out of the picture. So when this is facing you, this is my end that comes around, and I've opened up this edge here, and I've folded my fabric so that it goes upwards. And I have a 45-degree angle on the outside, and then this 90-degree on the inside. And this is a tight little space, so be patient. Now this one here, I didn't cut it until I kind of pre-fit it. The more bulk we give it, or the more tail we give it, the more bulk it'll end up with. But we need, at bare minimum, we need at least a finger's width past our little fold over here. So I'm just gonna lay it down, and then I'm going to cut it just a hair longer. I figure I can always cut it some more. I can trim it to fit, but I can't add any back into it. Okay, and we can see that works. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and trim the excess on my first side. Let me see if I can make this lay nicely. If I had my iron over here, I would iron this. We're going to finger iron today, and I'm going to cut off this excess right here. Okay, I'll make this face you again. So when my 45 is going this direction, and I lay this guy on this side down, and I want to make this fit nicely, and I need it kind of tight up against, you can see I have a problem here because my 45 is trying to slide on me. I'm going to take this over to the iron for just a second, and I'm going to iron this. Okay, so I ironed my 45 degrees, and then I ironed it going across here, and I'm going to trim this bottom edge again just to make it a little bit cleaner, because that's going to help in the end. You know, some people tell you don't bother trimming like a 1/16 of an inch, but if it makes it easier for you, just do it. Okay, so my tail is a little bit long, so I'm going to cut off some. I'm going to go for about a 1/2 inch. And when I put these together, I need the top edge from this side and the top edge from this side to match and sit together neatly like they're a little puzzle piece. And then I'm going to put a pin in the top, and I'm going to put a couple pins in the bottom. We could also use clips if you like clips. I prefer to have pins that I can sew over in case I need to. I know our goal is always to not sew over pins, but my theory is if we have fine enough pins, we can sew over them and it won't hurt the needle. Okay, so now I have my join together here, and you can see my top edge matches and my 45 goes across it, and then I'm going to stitch down here on this bottom edge. And because I'm going against this little flap, I'm going to go ahead and use my by Annie's stiletto and hold that down. So I'm going to start back probably about a 1/2 inch and get started. And then I'm going to reposition my point so it's laying nicely. And I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to stitch. I'm just going to overlap it probably another 1/2 inch. Okay, so you can see here that my edges meet nicely. So now I'm just going to fold it over. And I like to trim any of these little strings now, because after I top stitch it and they get stitched down even more, they're harder to get off. So it's easier to trim now. Okay, and you can see how it kind of naturally wants to come over. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the iron and I'm going to iron this again and just make this lay nicely. And I'm just going to kind of pull it so that my seams are kind of tight and pulling against that original stitching. And then this part right here can be a little wonky sometimes. So you just kind of have to finesse it. When you're ironing it, you're just going to iron it so that it lays nicely, and then put a clip or a pin. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this side up and then pull this side down a little bit and get it just how I want it, making sure I cover that initial stitching on the inside. And then when I start stitching, I'm going to start back here and I'm just going to go ahead and cover that part first so that it holds it down. If you have a problem with the binding staying where you want it to, like it just keeps trying to slip back out, when it's warm, put a couple clips on it and it'll cool so that it's still, it'll kind of help it stay in shape. And there is a bit of bulk right here on our join, but it's one of those places we just do our best and make it as pretty as we can. I always laugh and tell my students that everything comes down to your level of OCD. And so if your level of OCD is going to have a problem with the top stitching being perhaps imperfect or it possibly jumping up on this outer edge of the binding, then consider doing it from the front to the back and then hand stitching it so you can get it as perfect as you like it. Okay, I'm going to stitch this down real quick. I like to put my needle in the middle. I find it easier to work with. And then I'm going to stitch in probably, I don't know, a scant 1/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to work my way around. And I can see right now that my lower edge of my binding has slipped down farther than I want it to. So I'm just going to use my Annie stiletto and I'm going to pull one side and kind of squish the other side down. Try and get it where I want it. And if you have a problem, and it tries to wiggle on you and it starts to get going off in the wrong direction, then I would go ahead and stop right then, rip out the wonky stitches, and then just start again, overlap it a little bit. Here at Nana's, we're pretty human, so we try to do our absolute best, but keep in mind that we're not perfect, so we don't hold ourselves to that level that we can't achieve. And I'm going to stop just short, and I'm going to trim my threads. And I find that if I stop with the needle down because it holds my project, and then when I start, I try to start out just a little bit slow so that I can make sure it doesn't try to move on me. And then I'm going to overlap probably about a 1/2 inch, and there we go. So there's my binding. And thank you for watching my video. We hope that you'll come and check us out here at Nana's. And if you're not local, then we hope that you'll stop by when you travel through and check us out on our website, nanasquiltcottage.com. And if you have any questions, please give us a call or stop in and see us.